now let's move on to the relativist theories, which is the first one is cultural relativism, which I'm sure you guys have heard of here if you've been doing the readings. And we'll use this one before we contrast it with ethical relativism. Now, cultural relativism first says this, okay, well, let me say this. The first thing we should know about is cultural relativism is a descriptive type of ethics, okay? Now, what we mean by that is it is just stating the facts of a particular situation. It's not going to make any judgment about anything. It's going to say, this is how it is, and that's just it. Many anthropologists are cultural relativists, okay? And what they mean is this, is if we were to take a survey around the world, we would realize that moral codes are relative to culture, okay? We realize moral codes, right, are relative to culture. Right? They are just making a claim about that. So honestly, if you look in the United States, you will see they have a particular moral code. And if you look at a culture in the Middle East, they will have a particular moral code. And in Europe, they'll have a particular moral code. In Africa, and so on and so on and so on. Each different culture seems to have its own moral code in which it thinks is right. That is what they say. But they stop short of making the claim, what we call a normative claim, of passing judgment. They are not saying that it is right for the United States to think that way. They are just saying they do think that way. And they're not saying it's right for the Middle Easterners to think that way. They're saying they do think that way. So what you're getting is a more of a scientific kind of look at it of, we're just explaining, we're observing the world, and we're just explaining what happens, okay? And like I said, many anthropologists are like that. Really famous one, we'll put her up here, is Ruth Benedict, okay? Though, if you study her, she does begin getting closer to what we would call an ethical relativist here in a second. All right? Now, let's use this time to talk about ethical relativism then. All right? Or some of you may have seen moral relativism as well. Either way you can call it is fine. Okay? Then there's ethical relativism. And the first thing I should state about this is a normative, okay, ethics or ethical theory. Okay? So, first and foremost, we will see that they say the exact same thing the relativist does at first. That if you were to take an observation or survey the world, you would see that moral codes are relative to a culture. This culture believes this, that culture believes that. But where they go further is then they pass judgment. The ethical relativist says this, it is truly good for that culture to act in those ways, or truly wrong to act in those ways in which they believe. And there's another culture across the world who believes something separate, it is truly good or wrong for them to act the ways they believe. Okay? And what they're saying is there is a real moral code. Okay? It's not like it's just, okay, this is what we believe and that's it. They're saying that you must follow the code of your culture. And if you do not, you are wrong. You are morally wrong. So for example, if in the Middle Eastern cultures where some of them, okay, only allow men to be educated, okay, on some of them, right? Only allow men to be educated. If you were to go over into that culture and then try to educate women, you would be doing something immoral. You would be doing something wrong, okay? Because their culture believes in something else, and once they believe it, their culture believes it, okay? Once that happens, it truly becomes almost universal, but just within that culture, okay? And you must follow it, which kind of gives us a little head scratching and goes, well, how does that even happen? That is a tough question, okay? How does it happen just because a culture believes it, makes it actually true for that culture? That is, like I said, a good question, but we'll have to leave it for now, all right? As we'll see, just like I should mention, Noam Chomsky, a philosopher, says there's not really any truly ethical relativists who really believe that, because when push comes to shove, you know, anyone generally thinks that their morals are universal. For example, here in America, a lot of times we think, though it may be relative to our culture, we really believe while we're here that we're really right. Just like the cultures of the Middle East believe they're probably really right in what they're doing. But we'll have to see. And one thing I want to point out here as we jump back to cultural relativism is cultural relativism, you could be a moral nihilist and still be a cultural relativist. Okay, and what I mean by that is you believe there are no real moral standards. They don't really exist. There's nothing there judging us or anything, some God or some human nature that we have that makes this so. But at the same time, you could then say, but culture, that morals are relative to culture. If you took a survey of the world, you would see that this group has a certain moral codes, and that group has a different set of moral codes. But the nihilist would continue to say, there still is no real moral standard. It doesn't really matter what they pick. The ethical relativist is saying something much different. We all have different codes, and we are obligated morally to follow the codes of our culture. Okay? So that means in some ways, if you are rejecting against the dominant codes of your culture, you are doing something immoral. All right? That may be a big head scratcher for a lot of us. Okay? Now, let's go on and talk about what we mean by universalism. I've used the word a few times already, and we need to explain what we mean by that. And so we will put that, let's see, we got a little bit of room here. I know you guys can see me. We'll put it right here and talk about it. There are usually generally two universal theories, okay? There's what we call hard universalism, all right? Universalism, and then what we call soft universalism, all right? Now, sometimes you may hear it as strong or weak. Either way is fine, okay? Now, just to explain what a universal moral principle would be, a universal moral principle is something that all humans must follow, okay? Or we'll put it this way, some say all rational beings must follow. It's a cross-cultural code in which, it doesn't depend on our cultures. Now, our cultures may think this, and one culture may think that, but there is a universal or absolute moral code that exists that we all must follow. A lot of times we don't follow it, but if you're a universalist, you believe that there is a code or at least set of codes that exist that all rational beings or all human beings must follow despite what their cultures or despite what their beliefs are. Many people who are religious believe in this way, that maybe there's a God who set a certain group of codes that we all must follow. They would be a universalist, okay? But also you could have someone like Kant, and we'll tell him what type he is, Immanuel Kant, who thinks that our human reason dictates universal codes that we all must follow. He would be another universalist. But let's explain the difference between hard and soft. Let's talk about soft universalism first. Okay? The soft universalist believes there are a set of cross-cultural codes. Let's put that up first. All right? Set of cross-cultural codes or moral codes that all human beings must follow. Beings must follow. Okay? But there is one little but here. Okay? But these codes can be demonstrated differently across cultures. Okay? And what do I mean by demonstrate? What I mean by this is that there is a universal code that exists, but my culture may interpret it one way, whereas your culture may interpret it the other way. And though we're interpreted differently, we are still following a basic universal code. Okay? A really good example is to compare us to the Eskimos, who we've become to know a little bit more about in the last 100 years. Let's say treatment of the elders. Okay, here in the United States, generally how we treat our grandparents when they're starting to age is maybe we will put them in a home somewhere to help them, or we'll bring them into our house, or we'll visit them every day, take care of them. Okay, like they took care of us as children. But in the Eskimos villages, one really strange thing they used to do is they would, when you would get to a certain age, usually in your 50s or around 60, the culture would actually kind of push you out, and actually a lot of times maybe these elders would do it on their own, would basically leave the elders out in the middle of the wilderness, okay, in the middle of snow, for them to freeze to death and die. Okay, now we may think that would be horrible, like as soon as your parents get become elderly, you go, we'll just kick you out in the wilderness and let you die. We would see that as wrong, okay, but for some reason they saw it as right. And what did that mean, okay? And what if we think about it, if you're a soft universalist, you would say this, well, actually, according to the Eskimos, they did it for two reasons. First of all, many of the Eskimos believe that the body you die in is the body you keep. So if you die younger, that's the body you'll have in the afterlife. So if you have an old decrepit body and you die, you got to spend life in that body, which is actually kind of a good thing if you die early in some way. Another thing is there isn't a lot of food at certain times, and someone who's older who doesn't have the amount of energy to help work anymore and would just be taking food away from your children, and the population which is working, okay, goes and dies, and so it can leave more for others. So actually they see it as a good thing, actually a respectable thing. By doing this for their elders, they are actually taking care of them. They are allowing them to live a happy afterlife. Just like what we do, we believe we're taking care of our elders by sending them to a home. An Eskimo may look at us and go, well, that's horrible. You're letting him get all old and decrepit and becoming 90, and when he's in the afterlife, he's going to stay in that hard, really hard-lived body, okay? So But the soft universalist is saying, though, underneath it all, there is still perhaps the universal code of you must respect or take care of your elders. But how we respect and how we take care of it can be demonstrated differently from culture to culture. And this is why some soft universalists may be confused with ethical relativists, because in some sense, there is a slight form of relativism in universalism, but below it, there are a set of codes that they must follow. A very famous philosopher who I would say is a soft universalist is James Rachels, who believe there are at least perhaps 3 kind of fundamental codes that we all must follow. Those include things like, he thinks all cultures, even though they have different interpretations of what these mean, all believe murder is wrong, all believe that lying is wrong, and all believe that you must take care of infants. Okay, though there are certain interpretations of that, and possibly some arguments that may go against some of those codes. But that is what a soft universalist is. Now, after talking about that, it may be easy to understand what a hard universalist is. Okay, just like the soft universalists, they believe there's a set of cross-cultural moral codes that all human beings must follow, but that is a strict set of codes, that it cannot be interpreted in more than one way. It can only be interpreted in one way. Okay, so set of codes, or we'll put strict set of codes, all right, only one interpretation. Okay, so let's just, for example, say that the one about our elders and taking care of it, according to that, there is only one way to truly respect your elders, or maybe a group of ways you can respect your elders, and perhaps according to this, the Eskimos are really wrong. Even though they believe they're taking care of the elders, they're wrong. The only way to do it is to let them live, elders live as long as possible, make them as comfortable, and let their life be as great as possible. They'll live life in and out. Maybe that's the code. And therefore, even though Eskimos believe they're doing it right, they would be wrong. Many religions, as I mentioned earlier, are hard universalists. They say, here is God's commands, or the God's commands, all right? And these are what we must follow. And if you do not follow them exactly as God wants you to, then you are being immoral. Another philosopher who believes this, I mentioned him earlier, is Immanuel Kant, who believes basically the categorical imperative, or the idea that we must never treat anyone as a means to an end, only as an ends in themselves. That is what we always must do. And if there's ever a situation in which we are treating one as a means to an end, ever, even if it's just slightly, okay, then we are wrong, all right? That is what a hard universalist is. And many people, I would say, are probably, at least before we begin thinking on it, probably are more like a hard universalist. As you begin to think, you may begin falling into this category, or as you think you may be falling into this category, if you could ever really, theoretically you might be able to do it. Mr. Noam Chomsky believes that maybe you can't do that in real life. Okay? Now, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to email me. This is kind of just an introduction. And if you see my lecture online, the written lecture, there's a lot more to it than this. I thought this was just a good way to get kind of all the different theories that we're going to be talking about, or at least this week and the next few weeks, just so we can get them out there, okay? And from here on out, I will be using these terms. So, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to email me anytime. And other than that, this lecture is over. So I will see you next time on Sean Castleberry's Philosophical Lecture Choice. Thank you.